The Italian mob believed they understood power. They understood leverage, contracts, signatures, and quiet rooms where futures were decided without a punch being thrown. In their world, ownership did not come from strength but from fine print. And in the summer of 1940, they believed they were about to add the most valuable property of all to their portfolio, Joe Louis, the heavyweight champion of the world. They thought a contract could do what no fighter ever could. Joe Louis was unstoppable in the ring. Outside it, he was walking into a trap designed decades earlier for men just like him, men who generated wealth, fame, and symbolism, but were denied protection, education, and control over their own success. Contracts had replaced chains. Smiles had replaced threats. And the mob knew exactly how to use both. By August 1940, Joe Louis was 26 years old and the most famous black man in America. He was not just a champion, he was a symbol of possibility at a time when the country desperately needed one. 2 years earlier, he had knocked out Max Schmeling, Adolf Hitler's favored fighter, in front of 70,000 people. That victory reverberated far beyond boxing. For millions of black Americans, it felt like a declaration that excellence could not be denied, even by a world built to suppress it. In the ring, Joe Louis represented dominance, discipline, and inevitability. But the world beyond the ropes was far more dangerous. There were no referees there. No rules he had been trained to follow. And no corner men watching his back. Joe had a problem that plagued many successful black athletes in the early 20th century. He was making enormous amounts of money without the infrastructure to protect it. Boxing purses arrived in sudden, overwhelming bursts, $100,000 for a single title defense, but they disappeared just as quickly. Taxes were poorly understood. Family obligations were constant. Friends, hangers-on, and self-proclaimed advisors always seemed to appear at the right moment. And the legal system, designed without men like Joe in mind, offered little guidance and even less mercy. The Italian mob watched this pattern closely. They had been exploiting it for years. They understood that Joe Louis did not need to be threatened. He needed to be convinced. A contract, carefully written, could drain him far more efficiently than violence ever could. It could make theft look like opportunity. Exploitation look like partnership. Loss look like responsibility. That is why, on an August afternoon, Joe Louis found himself sitting in a cramped office on 125th Street in Harlem. It was not a gym. Not a training facility. Just a narrow room with peeling paint, stale air, and a single desk positioned like a courtroom bench. This was where decisions were meant to feel official. Across from Joe sat 3 men in expensive suits, men who did not belong to Harlem but believed Harlem belonged to them. Vincent Gallo sat at the center. He was in his mid-50s, with slick back hair and a practiced smile that projected reassurance while promising nothing. He spoke slowly, confidently, the way men do when they expect to be believed. To Joe, he introduced himself as an investment advisor. To the mob, he was a collector. To Gallo's right sat Frank, the fixer, Marino, thick-necked, quiet, and heavy in both build and presence. He said very little. He did not need to. His role was not persuasion but pressure. Muscle dressed up as respectability. On the other side was Anthony DiNapoli, younger, restless, and sharp-eyed. He handled the paperwork, flipping pages, pointing to clauses, speaking quickly whenever Joe hesitated. He was the one who knew where the trap was hidden. On the desk between them lay the weapon, a 15-page contract printed in dense, unforgiving type. Next to it sat glossy brochures depicting Cotton Club, Harlem's most famous nightclub, photographed in elegance and excess. Crystal glasses. Well-dressed patrons. A fantasy of wealth and permanence. Gallo began smoothly. Joe, he said, was making incredible money now, but boxing careers ended quickly. Punches slowed. Bodies aged. What would happen when the crowd stopped cheering? When the checks stopped coming? This, Gallo explained, was about Joe's future. The Cotton Club, he said, was expanding. New locations were coming, to Harlem, the Bronx, Brooklyn. They needed investors. Smart investors. People with name recognition. People who understood entertainment. Joe Louis, they told him, was exactly that kind of man. Frank leaned forward and delivered the promise. $50,000 invested now would become $150,000 within 2 years. Guaranteed. On top of that, Joe would receive 10% ownership in all 3 clubs. His name on the door. Joe Louis's Cotton Club. The image was intoxicating. Joe could see it clearly. Financial security for his mother. Stability for his family. A future that did not depend on absorbing punishment in the ring. For the first time, he was not imagining himself as a fighter, but as an owner. What Joe could not see was the machinery underneath the promise. The contract was expertly designed. It looked legitimate. corporate language, revenue projections, professional formatting. But buried deep within it, page 11, section 7, subsection C, was the truth. Joe's $50,000 would not go into any club. It would go into an investment pool controlled entirely by Gallo and his partners. The so-called guaranteed returns were tied to performance benchmarks that would never be met. The 10% ownership existed only in a shell company that did not legally own the Cotton Club or any of its supposed expansions, and if Joe tried to withdraw, he would owe them $100,000 in early exit penalties. It was a perfect trap. One the mob had used repeatedly on boxers, musicians, and athletes. The victim put money in. The money vanished. And when they realized the deception, the contract ensured they owed more than they had ever invested. Joe Louis, genius in the ring, inexperienced in business, saw none of it. He hesitated. $50,000 was almost everything he had saved. He said maybe he should speak to his manager. Dinopoli shut that down instantly. Managers, he said, did not understand high-level investments. This was specialized business. Harlem business. And besides, the opportunity was closing tomorrow. Other investors were already lined up. If Joe walked away now, it would be gone. It was a lie. There were no other investors. This contract had been written for one man and one man only. Joe reached for the pen, the moment hovered. Ink was seconds away from paper. His career, his finances, his autonomy, all about to be signed away quietly, legally, and permanently. Joe Louis had faced the hardest punchers in the world without fear. But in that office, surrounded by men who smiled instead of swung, he was closer to defeat than he had ever been in his life. He did not know it yet, but this was the most dangerous moment of his career, and then the door opened. The door opened without a knock. No warning. No apology. Just the sound of authority entering a room that did not belong to the men sitting inside it. Bumpy Johnson walked in like he owned the place, because in every way that mattered, he did. At 35, Bumpy was Harlem's undisputed king. 3 years out of Sing Sing, he had rebuilt his empire piece by piece, the numbers racket, the protection network, the invisible lines that told outsiders where they were welcome and where they were not. Every Italian gangster in New York knew the rule. By 1940, Harlem was Bumpy Johnson's territory. He wore a charcoal three-piece suit, pressed and precise, a white shirt and black tie. Nothing flashy. Nothing careless. Tucked into his waistband was the straight razor that had carved his reputation into Harlem streets long before contracts became the weapon of choice. Bumpy's eyes moved slowly around the room. He saw Joe Louis, pen in hand. He saw the contract on the desk. He saw the 3 Italians in suits who did not belong there. "Joe," Bumpy said calmly. "Put the pen down." Joe looked up, confused. "Bumpy, I'm in a meeting." "I know exactly what you're in," Bumpy replied. "Put the pen down." Joe did. In that single motion, the balance of power shifted. Vincent Gallo forced a smile, the kind men use when they believe politeness can still save them. He tried to assert control, calling it a private business meeting, insisting they were discussing legitimate investments. Bumpy cut him off without raising his voice. "You're discussing how to steal $50,000 from Joe Louis and make him think he's being smart while you do it." Bumpy stepped forward, picked up the contract, and flipped through it with practiced ease. He did not read every word. He did not need to. He had seen this scam before, different names, same structure, same outcome. He tossed the papers back onto the desk like they had already lost their value. "The Cotton Club investment," Bumpy said, almost amused. He looked at Gallo. "Creative. I'll give you that. You make a man feel like he's buying prestige instead of chains." Then Bumpy turned to Joe. "Joe, let me ask you something. You ever been inside the Cotton Club?" Joe shook his head. "No. They don't let black people in," Bumpy finished for him. "Not as customers. Only as performers." The room went quiet. "And you're telling me," Bumpy continued, "that these 3 want to make you a partner in a club that won't even let you through the front door?" The excitement drained from Joe's face. The illusion collapsed in real time. Gallo tried to recover, stammering about new locations and integration, about how things were changing. Bumpy's voice cut through the lie like steel. "There is no expansion. There are no new clubs. There's just a fake investment designed to rob Joe Louis blind." He picked up the contract again and flipped to page 11, section 7. Subsection C, Bumpy said. "Investment pool subject to partner discretion." Translation: they take your money and do whatever they want with it. He turned another page, performance-based returns. Translation: you'll never see a dime. Another page, early withdrawal penalty. Translation: if you figure it out and try to leave, you owe them double. Bumpy looked up at the three men. This isn't business, he said. It's a trap. Frank Marino tightened his jaw and finally spoke, insisting they were legitimate businessmen offering a real opportunity. Bumpy reached into his waistband and removed the razor. He did not snap it open. He did not wave it around. He placed it gently on the desk, still sheathed, beside the glossy Cotton Club brochure. The room froze. Let me tell you what's legitimate, Bumpy said quietly. Joe Louis is Harlem's champion. 2 years ago, he knocked out Hitler's favorite fighter and made every black person in this country stand a little taller. He's not just a boxer. He's a symbol. Bumpy met each man's eyes in turn. And you walked in here thinking you could turn him into your victim. DiNapoli tried to speak. Bumpy cut him off. You're offering theft with paperwork. Bumpy pulled the razor from its sheath. The blade caught the light. Here's my counteroffer. You tear up that contract right now. In front of me. Then you walk out of Harlem and never approach Joe Louis again. Not with investments. Not with opportunities. Not even to say hello. Gallo's composure shattered. He muttered about connections, about people they worked with. Bumpy didn't blink. I don't care who you work with. In Harlem, I am the connection. And Joe Louis is under my protection. He raised the razor slightly. You know what this is for? It's not for cutting paper. It's for cutting people who forget where they are. His voice dropped to a whisper. So here's what happens next. Either you tear up that contract, or I carve the word thief into your foreheads. Then I make sure every gangster, businessman, and hustler from here to Chicago knows exactly what you tried to do. Fear spread through the room. One of the men lost control completely. Gallo's hands shook as he grabbed the contract. We'll tear it up, he stammered. We'll tear it up right now. Page by page, 15 pages of lies were ripped into confetti. When it was done, Bumpy nodded once. Smart choice. He turned to Joe. These gentlemen are leaving. You're coming with me. Outside on 125th Street, the city felt different. Joe finally found his voice. He asked how Bumpy had known. Bumpy shrugged. Word travels in Harlem. They walked together as people nodded respectfully, stepping aside. Joe admitted the truth quietly. I almost signed it. I thought it was real. Bumpy stopped and put a hand on his shoulder. You're the best fighter in the world, he said. But outside the ring, the world is more dangerous than anything you face inside it. There are more men trying to rob you with contracts than fists. He gave Joe advice that would echo for the rest of his life. You want to invest? Fine. But you get your own lawyer. Someone who works for you. Someone who reads every word. You don't sign anything you don't understand. Joe nodded. If it sounds too good to be true, it is, Bumpy finished. Before they parted, Joe asked the question that mattered most. Why'd you help me? Bumpy smiled slightly. Because when you knocked out Schmeling, I felt it too. When you stand in that ring, you represent us. And I protect what's mine. Joe Louis went on to defend his heavyweight title 25 times. He made millions. He still struggled later in life, bad investments, tax problems, but he never fell for a scam again. Bumpy Johnson died in 1968. Joe Louis followed in 1981. After Joe's death, a letter was found, written years earlier and meant for Bumpy. Bumpy never saw it. But its meaning survived. You saved me from thieves in suits. You taught me that strength isn't just about hitting, it's about knowing when to walk away. That August day in 1940 was never really about $50,000. It was about a line being drawn. About Harlem protecting its own. About understanding that power without intelligence is fragile, and that the most dangerous threats don't come with fists, they come with contracts. If this story moved you, share it. Subscribe. And remember, read the fine print.